Hi everybody, welcome back to the studio. Hope you're all well. It's October, it's pretty dark, but out of the darkness comes the light, and I have got a fabulous portrait for you this week. It's been in the studio for a while, probably since June, and I've been dying to get onto it, but as you know, it's been really busy in the studio and there's lots of other projects going on and lots of stuff happening in the background, so it has languished in the rack, but I'm ready to get started. And yeah, without further ado, let me introduce you to the next painting. So my client who's painting this is on Patreon, and I'm sure they may correct me. I think June, it could be longer, but here she is. This is a fabulous 18th century portrait, mid 18th century. You can just see that it's absolute quality. The way that dress has been rendered, the detail in the lace work, small little details here, this little kind of like jewel emblem holding up her sleeves, the ruche of that silk, and then the face very, very delicately painted. When it first arrived, I was almost thinking it could have been like a lithograph or a print. It's so flat, the paint layer is so finely applied. But a few tests and a little bit of a closer inspection does reveal it to be oil on canvas. As you can see here, it has been lined in the past. You can see the old lining edge there. And it's been bashed about a little bit. There's sections of the tacking edge that have been lost and removed and flakes off. We've got a number of markings on the back in chalk. That appears to say something sale, one sale, something. So lots of writing. I feel like this painting's had a bit of a life, but a beautiful stretcher. That stretcher, the woodwork, the craftsmanship in that stretcher is fantastic. And here's our first clue, Ramsay, circa 1750. So if that is the case, and this is an Allan Ramsay portrait, it is by a very significant artist and a real master portrait painter. Those dovetail joints for that stretcher are fabulous. Again, more markings that I can't quite make out. But yeah, whenever this was lined, if that's not the original stretcher, it is really good quality. Now the only concern, or one of the concerns, is this kind of bitumized look on the background. So it's hung over a fire for many, many years, and that's caused the either varnish or paint layer to craze and contract. But on the face of it, the face area is still very flat. And I've had this recently in a number of paintings where the background has bitumized, yet the portrait remains intact. And I have seen this lacework before in other Ramsay portraits, so that is making me feel like this well could be a Ramsay original. Here's further evidence that it's been lined before. And you can see where it has started to deteriorate. So I think it has been in the damp as well. So not only has it had extreme temperature to cause that paint to crackle, it's also had damp that's caused those tacking edges to fray. So if this is around 1750, it makes it around 280 years old. And just from looking at it, you can see that it's had a life. I feel like it has travelled as well. Now there is a frame for this painting as well, which I've got, which I haven't shown. Again, further investigation will reveal whether that's the original frame or not. But what a fabulous picture. So, as ever, the first port of call is to use my inspection lamp and put the portrait under UV light, and any fresh or recent retouchings will glow or show up dark. So you can see in her eye there's a couple of little bits there on her eyelid, and there's a little dot under her nose and a dot on her lip. So on her face, nothing too significant in the main features. You can see a few dark little patches on her cheek there, and then we'll look at the background. So just generally looking over the background, the varnish is fluorescing green, suggesting it's a very old Damar varnish, and there's lots of patches. There's lots of patchy areas where there might be overpaint added, like down here in this section here on the stretcher bars. We'll just have a look on this other side. I can already see some damage. So that big dark patch was probably an impact that has been repaired. That may be why it was relined in the first place. Lots of little bits as well here, and yeah, around her shoulder. Let's get her on the bench and see a little bit closer. Few little bits on her dress, nothing major. They look like they could be little just accretions or something, or insect poop, for want of a better word. And then again, down in the background, looks like there's been an impact on that bottom right corner. Let's have a look at this section here where she's got that bow. So again, wow, okay, so the background there, plenty of little retouchings in there, which is to be expected. And then it looks like there's damage there on the bottom of the bow that's been retouched, because that's showing up quite dark. And then again, this bottom corner. So plenty of fresh, or fairly fresh paint added there. Yeah, there's another, looks like that's another impact as well. So the main sections of the portrait seem fine. The background has been battered somewhat, but that's to be expected when the portrait's this age. Thankfully her face is really good, just those few bits in her eyes and her nose and mouth. I'm also scanning for a signature. The signature's sometimes a mid-portrait, sometimes bottom corner, but unfortunately nothing is really singing out as I look. Just more and more damage. And there's that little bit there. You can see it on her dress. But again, no signature, which is a shame. Okay, so the next thing for me to do after I've done my UV checks is to do some small test windows. So I've got a number of different solvents and cleaning solutions that I use, and I'm going to test the bottom section of this painting now. So when this first arrived many months ago, I did a small test just to be able to report back to the client that it would clean, and there you can see the little bright dot there at the bottom. So that was the initial test. So I'm just going to revisit my notes, see what solution I'd put down there and what the mixture was, and then just recreate that now that I'm actually going to clean the portrait. So this first one is a solution that I normally use for surface dirt and nicotine, and you can see straight away that it's cutting through and revealing the colour of the dress underneath. But it's also leaving a little line on the tacking edge that it's not touching there. So this is a fairly weak solution, but that's a good start. So my next solution is a slightly stronger solvent solution. I'm just going to see if that will attack what's left, and that will tell me that it is just removing the varnish layer, and it does seem to have removed some of that. But the majority of this seems to be surface accumulations, and then a discoloured. It feels like a thin varnish. It's not liberally applied. So this next solution is slightly stronger again. And with this, you can see straight away there that it's cutting through the dirt layer and the varnish layer. And it's a bit stronger, quite a bit stronger. So that's removing both layers at once. So yeah, quite dark. So that was the strongest solution. And then the next test is to use the same two solutions again, the weak one first on the background to see what removes. And again, that does look a lot like nicotine or smoke damage and smoke staining. Consistent, slightly darker, a little bit darker than the first test swab. And then this next one is going to be my solvent solution. And see what kind of results we get from that. So it's a slightly different makeup because it pulls the varnish and the surface accumulations at the same time. But it doesn't appear to be going down to a ground layer. It doesn't appear to be removing an excess of paint or any paint. It's just a darker, instant kind of hit, if you like. So these are my test swabs that I've got. So that's the initial one that was just fairly weak. That was just removing the solvent layer, the varnish layer, and then these are the solvent cleans from the darker area. So I've got an idea of what solution I'm going to use. It feels like it's a fairly thin varnish that's probably got a thin nicotine layer on top. But each of those cleaning solutions give a good result. One of them, this one here, will require a two-stage clean, whereas the one on the right appears to just kind of clean the surface dirt and the varnish at the same time. So for me, the best solution was the number 2 solution there, the second test window, and that's what I'll be proceeding with for the clean of this painting. So I'm going to just line up my cotton here, ready to go, ready to make my swabs. Get my trusty swab stick, and I can't wait to start cleaning this pot. I can't tell you how excited I am to get on with this painting. It's been in the studio for so long. Every time my client comes, I'm like, yeah, I'll be on it soon. I'm getting to it. And then it's finally here. And I want to savor this. I want to really enjoy this whole process. So hopefully I'm going to kind of show you this a little bit in real time. And you'll enjoy it too. You'll see each individual swab and the effect that it has on this portrait, and just get to spend time with this picture, which is something that I've been wanting to do for months. So you can see straight away how effective that solution is. All that yellow discoloured varnish is coming off, and straight away you can see the brightness of that dress appearing. The little jewel is quite nice as well. I don't know if anybody knows a little bit more about what that fashion was. It looks like a jewel that bunches up the elbow of the dress. And the other section that I'm looking forward to is that blue bow as well. It looks quite delicately painted. It's not too exuberant, not too fancy. If you remember Harriet Nichols, a similar kind of period portrait, or maybe a little bit later on, the bows were very pronounced and they were a lot more elaborate. Whereas this is very, I don't know, even though that fabric is so luxurious, and the folds of the fabric, the bow seems a little bit, I don't know what the word is. It's not too exuberant, but look at the colours coming through on that dress straight away. We've got cool blue shadows closer to the body, and then these warm pink tones as well. So before I proceed any further, because I've cleaned quite a large section there, I'm just going to use my loom and magnify that section just to see exactly what's happening. So you can see it's very delicately painted there. That pink ground comes through. There are elements of the varnish still caught in the recesses and textures of the paint, so I may need to roll my swab slightly. Some of these thicker little blobs could be insect excrement or thicker bits of varnish that have gathered, so they can be tackled separately. But I'm learning how this painting has been made up. We've got the pink thin underpaint showing through. We've got the cooler blue tones that are thicker for the shadows, and then the very strong white highlights. So just by checking gives me confidence that I'm happy with my solution, and I'm happy to continue with this process. I'm just confident that what I'm removing is just the varnish and any historical retouchings that have sat on there as well. And it's always good to do those checks though, just to get up close to the painting and see exactly what's happening. And you can see the layers separate, you can see the ground layer, you can see the first fat layers, you can see glazes, and you can see the highlights. And then you can just get involved in the cleaning and get a nice balanced clean for that painting. Some little lines here that haven't shown up as overpaint, but they're quite dark and sharp, so if they're kind of darker tones, browns and blacks, you sometimes have to be careful of those. But the way that fabric is gathered, it just looks so real on a shoulder. You've got very straight angular creases on the top of a shoulder, and then them lovely curves, them kind of luxurious curves where it gathers. Fabulous, absolutely fabulous. So while I'm cleaning, the thicker peaks of paint are strong, and then at the background where the arm recedes into the background, it's going to be thinner, there's going to be less paint layer on there. So what I like to do is remove the varnish consistently, but then when I get to the background I almost feather in, so there's less pressure on the cleaning swab as I'm moving it around, and I'm just feeling that I'm removing the varnish gently on those areas. I'm not pressing down hard. So one of the things you can't see from these videos is that there is a little bit of pressure when you're cleaning, and it's a feel. You feel that varnish softening and you feel it removing. So where your cotton bud bites on the freshly softened varnish, it pulls, and then an area that's cleaned, you feel the smoothness of the paint layer and you know that everything's removed from that section. So as well as using your eyes, you're feeling the removal of that varnish across the painting as well. So it's a double-pronged attack, if you like, and it's just something you get used to with time. You get used to the feeling of a cleaned area and an area that's still biting. So I'm really enjoying seeing that pink underpaint show through. So the artist has used that to give that sheen and that shine to that fabric, and it just gives it another dimension. Rather than just thinking, oh, it's grey tones underneath there, that pink really warms it up and just gives that vibrancy to it, and just convinces my eye when I'm looking at it that that is real. That's a real dress that I'm looking at. And then where I'm cleaning there's two parallel lines just there, and they almost look like creases that are not a fold, like a crease in the fabric as well. So it's another little clever trick to emphasize the reality of that dress. So it's like a crease in that silk. And look at that, it's just beautiful, absolutely beautiful. I kind of want to show you up close, but I want to show you the whole thing as well as it's going. I want to show you the difference that it's making as I work across that painting. So my swab's softening sections, so that solvent has time to work and soften. And then on the soft section, imagine just something melting away, and then that cotton bud is just picking it up. But those little creases are so clever on that dress, they really are. And on the collar as well, there's like little, almost like chaffed areas again that are just suggesting what that fabric is and how it's responding to the wearer or the sitter. So again, I'm just softening sections here as it gathers around that lace area, and all the while just keeping the rhythm going and assessing what's happening through that portrait. I need to get a bit of distance, they'll just show you how fabulous that dress is. That's just incredible, absolutely incredible. I've just had to stop there because I want to savour this. This is pure pleasure. This is like going to an amazing restaurant and getting served a fabulous dish the steak is just really succulent and soft, and the vegetables are cooked to perfection, or it's a creme brulee and the sugar glaze on top just cracks as you hit it, and the custard is just delicious underneath. This is the same feeling for me. A beautiful portrait, a fabulously rendered dress, and the varnish just coming off really nicely. The mixture's perfect. There's nothing removing that shouldn't be. I'm not saying it'll be like this all the way through the restoration process, but at this point in time, pure pleasure, absolute pure pleasure. So I'm going to continue now cleaning that dress. I might work round to that bow. But yeah, she is fabulous. I knew she would be absolutely fabulous. I got asked a while ago what was one of the favourite paintings I've worked on in the past, and one of them was the Harriet Nichols portrait that I started my YouTube career with. It was a 6-part restoration, and the painting just arrived in the studio and it was in such a poor condition, really dirty, loads of rips and tears, and I started my usual cleaning process. And then I started to research the artist. So the inscription was of R.R. Reinagle, and I looked up Reinagle, and his father was a Philip Reinagle, and he was a fabulous artist, but he was a student of Allan Ramsay. So Allan Ramsay was a Scottish, born in Scotland in Edinburgh, portrait artist, and Philip Reinagle studied under him. And when Allan Ramsay died, Reinagle finished an awful lot of his portraits as well. So then Richard Reinagle, who was the artist that did Harriet Nichols, obviously a student of his father, and his brushwork was fabulous as well. And it's just really nice to see the progression of the artist's work come down through studio practice or through parents, and just see it passed down. So it's nice to think I've worked on an Allan Ramsay painting. I do feel like these are Allan Ramsay paintings, the quality of them, and then to know that same skill and talent and craftsmanship was passed down through Reinagle and through to Ramsay Reinagle, and I've also worked on his portraiture as well. It's just a really nice connection to have. And then when I did my research on Ramsay Reinagle, he was such a character. There was so much I could have or would like to have gone into more depth with, how he painted, his studio environment, the trouble that he got into with the Royal Academy. He was accused of forging a painting and submitting it as his own, and just the slanderous nature of the whole Royal Academy at the time was, I'd like to have gone into a little bit more detail about him as an artist. But then you have someone like Ramsay, hundreds of portraits under his belt, painted so many famous people, so many known people, and just the quality of his brushwork is fabulous. And then I stumbled across one of his in York Art Gallery, probably last year or the year before, and it's a fabulous picture and quite haunting, very, very delicate, but it has exactly the same lace work, or more or less the same lace work that's present on this portrait. So as soon as this came into the studio and we had the Ramsay connection, I was like, I've seen a Ramsay, I've seen one at York Art Gallery, and it had the same delicate lace work as this one. So all these little things, I'm no expert on Ramsay, but the more you have these paintings around you and the more time you spend with them, I can see how you could quite quickly become an expert on a certain artist, because you'd know the history, you'd know the style, you'd know the period, and it'd be the little details that carry through a painting that allows you to give it attribution. And especially with something like this, I feel like there are lots of little clues leading the way. So you can see here, I think there's overpaint on the background and it's bleeding into this bow. So this does look like it has been kind of maybe slightly overcleaned in the past. There's a little bit of a dullness and a thinness to it. Here's that damage that's been filled and that was restored over the top. So it has had a life. And then look at this little section here, some more detail or some more lace work on that dress, beginning to reveal itself. I keep having to get a shot of her, not a shot, but compose her face along with that dress so you can see the difference. And here you can see now where I've removed the varnish, we've got a matte finish, and you can see the chased edge of the gloss. So this is where the varnish is still soft and is still present, and I can get an idea of how much more I need to remove. But yeah, she's looking fabulous. Ramsay was born in Edinburgh, Scotland, the eldest son of Allan Ramsay, poet and author. From the age of 20, he studied in London under the Swedish painter Hans Heising and at the St Martin's Lane Academy. He left in 1736 for Rome and Naples and studied under Francesco Solamina. On his return in 1738, he first settled in Edinburgh, attracting attention by his full-length portrait of the Duke of Argyll. His pleasant manners and varied culture rendered him very popular, and his only serious competitor was Thomas Hudson, with whom he shared a drapery painter, Joseph Van Aken. Van Aken was so popular that leading portrait artists used to fight over him to get him to paint their draperies for him, and almost all the artists used him at that time. So I'm beginning to wonder if this is Allan Ramsay and it is by him and his studio. Perhaps the draperies were actually painted by Van Aken, or the tailor from Aken as he was known. What is undeniable is that this dress is fabulously rendered. So this lace section now, as I've mentioned before, is so finely painted. The detail is absolutely fabulous. It's translucent on her chest. You can see the highlights that have been created by just thin strands of paint. That pattern, I just feel, is totally authentic. But look at her shoulder there on the right hand side. You can see the pink tones of underpaint coming through, almost reflecting whatever else is in that room. And then the other colours, almost creases in that silk. I'm presuming it's silk. Please feel free to correct me if I'm wrong. It's just fabulous. So it sort of makes sense to me that, like some of the other artists we've learnt about, that you did employ a specialist for certain parts of the portrait. Ramsay's face is fantastic, much like John Riley. And Riley used Klosterman to paint his draperies. And it looks like this could be the same instance where Ramsay's used Van Aken to render this fabulous dress. So I've weakened my solution, as mentioned, and I've done this because this is a very fine detailed area. So the varnish isn't removing as quickly as it was on some of the bolder areas, and this just allows me to gauge exactly what is removing on these sections here. But look at the dark shadow of that dress going underneath the lace, so that's intentional. And then on this left hand side, the background's creeping in, so we've got the background coming across, so I've got to be careful that that doesn't remove. So again, just using my loom to just check what's going on here and trying to differentiate what is underneath as shadow, like that section there is the dress underneath, and then what is still elements of the discoloured varnish on top. So constantly checking as I'm going. So there's browny yellow elements of varnish, and then it's differentiating what is actually the intentional glazes or shading underneath as this area blends into the background. But those little brush strokes are so fine, so delicate. So yeah, tread carefully on this section here. This fold on that shadow is the dress coming down, and then it kind of cups and loops around and then disappears. So it's been very clever there how he's not put too much detail in, but then this background is creeping across, and I've got to just be careful that that's just not some historical overpaint that's been added at a later date. But I'm continuing now with my weakened mixture, and the flesh tones here are quite solid, so you can see there straight away as it bites in. But obviously these flesh tones have the stronger whiter pigments in that allow you to be a little bit more confident with what you're doing. And that varnish that is removing is consistent across the whole painting. There's a slight shadow there coming down from her cleavage, I think. But it's a very modest portrait, this. There's no exuberance, there's nothing flamboyant about it. It's just quite a discreet portrait, if you like. There's a sensibility to it. You know, the sitter is conveying a certain amount of modesty there. There's a slight suggestion of that opulence with the lace, but it is a very modest portrait. And I think she's quite young. The more I look at this, she's young. This girl or young lady, maybe early 20s or late teens. But yeah, she is a young lady, and maybe that's part of the way the artist has intended to capture her as well, to try and bring across that innocence as she's coming into womanhood. But that silk gown, is so exuberant. So there's a contrast there, isn't there, between the gown of that finest silk and then the innocence and the expression that she's portraying as well. It's quite beguiling. Well, if you're anything like me, I think you'll be in a bit of a trance. I feel like I'm in a bit of under a spell with this portrait, but unfortunately I'm going to have to leave it here for this week. Time constraints have meant that I'm going to have to cut this short. You can see her there. We've done a lot. We've cleaned a lot of that portrait. You know, we've got a dress done and a upper chest, and then we've still got a face and the background to do. So I'm gonna have to come back next week and carry on with her. I've also got a little bit of a surprise too, so please make sure you tune into the next episode. It'll be live on Patreon and it'll also be on YouTube as well. If you've not checked out Patreon yet, please head over there. I've got lots of exclusive videos, paintings you won't have seen, vlogs behind the scenes. You can join for as little as $2.50 a month, but there's also the Studio Restorer option where you get lots of tutorials and other behind the scenes stuff as well. Anyway, massive thank you to my patrons for supporting me and keeping this channel going. Without you, we wouldn't be on air, so I do appreciate everything you do for the channel and for me. But I hope you've enjoyed that. She is, I'm going to say it again, absolutely fabulous, and she's a real treat to work on. So tune in next week for more on this portrait, and as I say, there'll be a bit of a surprise for you as well next week. Okay guys, weather report has to be done. Awful, chucking it down, grey, miserable, getting cold, but you know, we are in October now and winter is coming, but it's nice and cozy in here. The landlord's put the pipes on for me so it's warm, and yeah, I'm going to carry on with her and keep you updated. Have a nice weekend. Hope you're all well and see you all soon. Cheers guys.